I don't know that Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. needs an introduction to this group here. I know that there were people for whom you are the face now of American history, particularly the African American experience. And I would be really interested to hear how that sits with you, and if that is really how you saw yourself when you were starting out this work. But for those 3 people here who may not know all, he is the Alphonse Fletcher University Professor and Director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University, Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, journalist, cultural critic. Dr. Gates has received 54 honorary degrees. He's authored 17 books. He's created 14 documentary films, including Wonders of the African World, Black in Latin America, and Finding Your Roots. Series 3, right, is in production now, or is just been Series 3? Carol at noon, busy person. And adding to his latest honor, of course, is the DuPont Award, which he received last night. He's also editor-in-chief of TheRoot.com, a daily online news magazine. In my news section on my iPad, my news app, it is one of my go-to news sources. And he still oversees the Oxford African American Studies Center, the first comprehensive scholarly online resource in the field. And before we get started, I'd love to see a short excerpt from your award-winning work.
The dehumanization of an entire race was a process requiring many steps. One occurred here. This beautiful island, shrouded in fog, is home to what was once a fortress built by the British in the 1670s.
Out there is the mouth of the Putloco Creek. African middlemen used to bring their slaves and goods down the Putloco Creek, through the mouth of the Putloco Creek out there, all the way to this beach here.
So they came right through that gap,
Yes,
right
sir.
there.
Yes.
They would bring them here, then march them straight up there and sell
Up
them.
this hill, up onto the trading area.
Though its walls have long crumbled, I could still get a sense of how this place once worked.
This was the main entrance into the fort. It had a double folding door with a little room patch on top.
British officers lived here in a lavish 2-story mansion. The high cost of purchasing even a single slave meant that most masters tried to breed their own labor force. And some went to great lengths to make it happen, from forced pairings of slave couples to rape. Of all the major slave societies in the New World, only in the United States did the slave population naturally increase over time. The 400,000 people that we imported from Africa had become nearly 4 million by the outbreak of the Civil War. The numbers are staggering, and so was the violence required to keep them all under control. 22-year-old Kathleen Neal was working for racial justice through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But the rising call for Black power awakened her desire for something more radical. After meeting Panther Minister of Information Eldridge Cleaver, Kathleen moved west, married Cleaver, and took charge of communications for the party.
The question is not, will it be nonviolence versus violence, but whether a human being can practice his God-given right of self-defense.
The Panthers came up with their own bold new solution to the long-standing problem of police harassment in the ghetto: armed community patrols.
They just assume their Second Amendment rights. They say, we have the right to defend ourselves under this Constitution, and we're going to do it openly and publicly.
We would have power to determine the destiny of our own community. We would not be subjected to police brutality. And that was a pretty direct take in the streets with their weapons, patrolling the police. It was something that the Oakland police had never encountered.
I know I love the smile at the end. You know, I've had a chance to speak with you many times about your work, but I've never actually talked to you about yourself. So I'm interested in, first of all, I'd like to know, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
A doctor. My mother, God rest her soul, thought that, as I said last night, you know, in heaven there's Jesus, and then there are doctors, right? Mm-hmm. So that, and I don't know about you, was that the way when you were growing up, that the smartest little colored girls and colored boys were, you know, raised to be doctors? And my brother is an oral surgeon. He's 5 years older than I. He's chief of dentistry over at Bronx Lebanon Hospital. And I was going to go to, I went to Yale, and I was pre-med, and then I got a fellowship to go to Cambridge, the University of Cambridge. And I was going to just get a second degree and then come back and go to med school or law school. And I met two Africans there who changed my life. Wole Soyinka, this is 1973, and Anthony Appiah. And Anthony Appiah is the greatest philosopher from the history of the African continent, now at NYU, and my kid's godfather. And Wole Soyinka, 13 years later, would get the Nobel Prize for Literature. And they, I would hang out with them. They taught me to eat Indian food. It's my favorite food. I'd never eaten it before. And Soyinka taught us to drink wine. You know, my generation, speaking of cannabis, the only thing we did with wine
We weren't speaking of cannabis, but go ahead.
For my generation, all we did with wine was fill hookah with it, right? Like the cheapest kind of wine. Remember Cold Duck and Bally High and all those kind of cheap
I know
wine?
not of what you
yeah,
speak.
You know nothing about that, right? I didn't know you could drink it. And one night, I told them about W.E.B. Du Bois's dream to edit the Encyclopedia Africana, the equivalent of the Black Encyclopedia Britannica. And he tried all his life, from 1909 when he had the idea till his death in Ghana on the eve of the March on Washington in August 1963. And that night we made a drunken pledge that the three of us would try to edit it. And we subsequently did. But I knew when I got to Cambridge that what I really wanted to do was to be a scholar, a person of the book. And I'd been living someone else's fantasy. Yale had a great program when I was an undergraduate. It was a gap year in the middle of your education. So 12 people were chosen in their sophomore year to take a year off and work somewhere in the third world. And then you came back and all your classmates were seniors and you were a junior. It's called 5-year BA. It was funded by the Mellon Foundation. And I really wanted to go. I wanted to be selected because I wanted to go to Africa. I'd heard so much about Africa, and this is 1969. We all had big afros. You know Cornel West Afro? Cornel West Afro looked like a crew cut next to my afro. I had a closet full of dashikis, you know, Captain Black Man. I knew some Swahili words. And I wanted to go, habari gani, you know. I wanted to go and see what it was really like. The phrase I used was to immerse myself in blackness. And I lived in a little mission hospital in the center of Tanzania. It was an Anglican mission hospital, and I worked in the operating room, assisting in giving general anesthesia. And I did that from August till December of '73. I had my 1970, I had my 20th birthday in this little village where everybody lived in mud huts, no running water, no electricity. You call them torches, kerosene lanterns, and it was a fabulous experience for me. But I also knew deep down that I'd rather be writing about living in that village, assisting in giving anesthesia, than living in the village, assisting in giving anesthesia.
How did your parents feel about your change of direction? As Dr. Gupta was talking about how the first people he called when he won the DuPont were his parents. Did your parents, how did they feel about your change of direction and becoming a person of the book?
You know, they loved to read and write. My mother wrote the obituaries and delivered the eulogies for all the colored people in Potomac Valley. I grew up in a little paper mill town halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C. in the Allegheny Mountains. You don't think of this as a center of African-American culture. But it turns out that my family's lived there for 250 years on both sides of my family. I'm a Redmond on my mother's side and a Redmond on my father's side. That's how small the black community is. But we can go back with a continuous paper trail of black people back to 1750 on both sides of my family. It's a very, very, very stable area And now I can't remember why
I was asking what your parents felt about your move into academia, because a lot of us
Oh,
who
yeah.
work in kind of paper fields where, you know, a lot of our parents, as you were mentioning, grew up with this idea that the way to succeed in this country is to have a concrete job that
Yeah.
people understand.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, a job with a sort of an obvious a title. You are a doctor, you are a lawyer, you are a firefighter. So,
Yeah, they went through some changes, I think. But my brother had already made it through dental school. My father's first cousin had graduated from Harvard Law School in 1950. So, you know, there were a lot of generations. There were 3 generations of my family has gone to Howard. 3 generations have gone to Howard, starting in 1909. So I wasn't a first. I wasn't even first generation Ivy in my extended family. And I think that had I been my older brother, there would have been more pressure. My brother gave me a hard time. You know, he would say, look, you know, you don't want to be poor, you like luxury. You're going to be a poor professor teaching English? And I go, well, you know, that's what I want to do. My father's favorite expression was, when you're dead for a long time. And I decided that I would rather fail as a scholar and then go to law school or med school than to go to my grave thinking I could have been a contender, because I really wanted to be a person of the book. And what I was saying was that my mother, you know, wrote all the eulogies for all the, you know, we were colored back then. It's one thing, when I write, I use the words that people used to describe themselves at the time, rather than to be anachronistic.
I love for those who haven't read it, though, I would recommend, I'll take personal privilege and recommend your memoir, Colored People.
Thanks.
Which is, which you wrote actually quite some time ago, but you might need to add an addendum now.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but Colored People kind of describes also the milieu, the Allegheny Mountains, and
Yeah.
all of that, and this kind of interstitial world that you lived in where there were no signs, but everyone knew where you were supposed to be,
Yes.
right? Which is kind of an interest. I'm always interested in how that, being in that kind of interstitial space, a lot of people kind of are familiar with the course of American racial history, where at one point the delineation was this, you here, you there. But you grew up in that interstitial space, in that little middle space where the signs were invisible.
That's right. Invisible to you, bumped your head up against what,
Right.
For example, first of all, thank you very much. It's my favorite book. I wrote it after my mother died. I was grieving so much, and I had 2 little girls, and I said something, and they couldn't even remember what my mother was like. So I sat down and I wrote this book because I wanted them to know who my mother was. My dad only died a couple years ago. My mom died when she was 71. My dad when he was 97 and a half. So, but I wanted to recreate that world, that sepia world, the colored world. And Brown v. Board is 1954. Schools integrated in my county in 1955. And I started school in 1956. No protest, no Martin Luther King, you know, no nothing, because there were only a handful of black people there, and it was stupid to have 2 separate school systems. Besides, they liked basketball, and they figured they'd have a better basketball team if they let the brothers play on the team, right? But you couldn't date white kids. And we had, basically, it was like an art school. So we had an operetta every year. We had what was called a junior fair, and every class would have to dance. And they wouldn't let a black boy and a white girl dance. You could dance, if there were an odd number in the class, they would pit 2 boys together of the same race, and then if they had no choice, a white boy and a black boy, or a white girl and a black girl, but never could you cross that line. And even at the only soda fountain place, after a basketball game, we always had this fabulous basketball team, and we only had one sport. The black kids would have to stand up at the counter and get their food to take away and eat off paper plates, while the white kids could sit down and eat off, you know, real plates with forks and knives. You know, it was bizarre.
Are you all getting this? Because I know you're all looking at me like, what?
Yeah.
You know, can you even envision this? This is. You realize this is not when dinosaurs walked the earth, right? This is when you were growing up, right?
And it shaped me profoundly. It was deeply traumatic to me. Fortunately, I never had an experience like many of the great black writers, like Richard Wright famously says that, you know, his teachers said Negroes should be carpenters or bricklayers. You know, my teachers, who were all white except for my typing teacher, junior year, always encouraged me. I was the smartest kid in the class. They treated me like a little prince. They always rewarded me. I never faced that kind of stigma or obstacle. But my mother, the reason I keep mentioning this is that my mom, I realize in retrospect, was my model for a writer. because as soon as you would die, people would come and say, Pauline, would you, her name was Pauline Augusta Coleman Gates, would you write the obituary, which would be in our local paper, and then she would go to the funeral, and she would stand up and read their eulogy. And when I was a little kid, before I started school, I would go too, just to watch. I'd get all dressed up, and she was so beautiful, and she'd stand up and read, and I thought she was a goddess, you know? And it was so funny, if my father was there, we'd be walking home from the funeral home, and my father would turn to my mother and say, well, Pauline, you did a good job. He said, in the middle, he said, I started to stand up, look at the casket, see if that son of a bitch was still in it. So I had that, and the second model for a writer was James Baldwin. The Gateses were Episcopalians. So I started going to my father's church when I was 14. In the summer of '65, I went to the Episcopal Church camp in West Virginia. It's one camp for the whole diocese. And there were all these white kids, you know, Episcopalians, and 3 black kids. And all these kids were preppies. And it was August, so that was Watts. Now, at the church camp, you're completely cut off from newspapers and everything, except on Sunday when they bring milk and cheese and butter and all that stuff, and the Sunday paper. And there was this big headline, Negroes riot in Watts. So I didn't know, Michelle, what a riot was. I didn't know if white people were killing black people, or black people were killing white people, or black people, as I found out, were killing each other, or, burning down houses. And this, all the white kids sort of looked at me for a comment, and you know what that's like. When you're the only one in the, you know, if you're the only Muslim in the classroom, people turn to you and say, okay, assalamu alaikum, tell me how do you people feel, you know? And that's how they did with us. And I found the whole thing very embarrassing. And a very sensitive Episcopal priest gave me a book. He came to my cabin, and gave me a book, and I looked down, there's this black man staring at me. And it took me a while to realize that he was the author. And it was called Nobody Knows My Name by James Baldwin. And I stayed up all night reading that book. And as soon as I got home, I ordered through the Book of the Month Club. I ordered everything James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, Go Tell All the Man, you know, everything. And so I think that was the root of between my mother and James Baldwin, they were the roots of this, you know, I had this rational programming to be a doctor for all the reasons that you just said. Smart people are doctors, you make the most money, you have respectability, and if the Klan shows up, you can just pack up and split and go through the North and still be a doctor, right? You have maximum flexibility. But deep down, I wanted to be the person of the book. So even when I got the fellowship to go to Cambridge, the next day I wrote to the chief of correspondence at Time magazine. And I'd started writing guest columns for the Yale Daily News when I came back from Africa. And I said, I'm going to be in England. I want to be an intern at Time magazine for the summer. And he wrote me back, and I sent him some of my columns. He invited me to lunch, and he offered me a job. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And Strobe Talbot had graduated from Yale before me, been a Rhodes Scholar, gone to Oxford, and Time had done that with him. And I used that example. And they did it with me. So even when I was enrolled in the English program at Cambridge, ostensibly to get a PhD, I was working in the summer and during vacations for Time magazine. So I've always had this dual, once I abandoned medicine, this dual career of being an academic and being a journalist.
Why film? I mean, you were, at the point at which I recall you started making films, you were already known, you'd already established a reputation as an academic in the traditional sense. You know, you write, you research, you publish the word in the written sense. Why film?
Well, again, in retrospect, when I saw Kenneth Clark's Civilization, which I think was 1969, it was so grand and beautiful, the history of the West. And I love ideas, I love books, and I marveled at I'd never seen a real documentary before. I had seen the year before, in 1968, Bill Cosby did Black History Lost, Stolen, or Strayed. And that was my introduction, as I said last night, to Black history, which really, you know, lit me on fire. But Kenneth Clark was doing the history of the West, going to museums and walking around. And then I saw Jacob Bronowski do The Ascent of Man. Then I became friends with John Kenneth Galbraith's son, Jamie, at Cambridge. And he took me back to meet his father. and his father was making a PBS series called The Age of Uncertainty. And I remember, they lived on 26 Francis Avenue in Cambridge, which is right near the Harvard Divinity School. And I remember after that day, I was leaving to go to Yale Law School. I attended Yale Law School for 1 month, right? And then I took a leave of absence. Last time I checked, I was still on leave, right? But I went outside of the Galbraith house, and I stood there and looked at this beautiful house, and I thought, if I could ever live on a street like this, teach at a place like Harvard, which is where he was a professor, and make documentary films, I will die and go to heaven. And that was 1975. In 1996, I bought the house 2 doors from John Kenneth Galbraith. And by then I was making my second documentary. What happened, I moved to Boston in 1991, and the great Henry Hampton, the greatest black documentarian ever, who did Eyes on the Prize. How many of you have seen Eyes on the Prize? My man. Yep, well, you all should see it. It's the best thing ever done on the civil rights movement. And Hamp called me and invited me to, well, it turned out it's his building called Blackside, his film company. And it was like crack. You know, when I walked in there, I thought, he had all these producers and editing rooms, and I thought, wow, man, how could I? So I said, you know me, so what I did was I said, well, Henry.
Why did he call you up, first of all? Why did he call you up?
Well, by 1991, I was,
you were the man. You were the man.
I was brought to Harvard to reinvent African Americans. So it had been rude. Everybody was calling me who was, Boston doesn't have that many black people really, but the black people who were the, you know, in the talented 10th, they would all call me and invite me to dinner. And so he just called me out of the blue. And by the end of the day, I knew I wanted this career, but I had no idea how I would get it. In fact, I said to him, not so subtly, well, perhaps we could do a film together. And he said, sure, I'll make you an advisor. I go, no, maybe I could be in it. And he goes, oh, we'll make you a talking head, you know, one of those people who never looks at the camera, looks off to the side because the assistant producer is interviewing you, right? I wanted to be the man. I wanted to look at the camera. I wanted to do an essay about the black experience. I wanted to own it. And he said, I don't make that kind of documentary. He said, not to hurt your feelings, but he said, nobody black in the whole industry makes that kind of first person. And you think about it, it's true. So 3 years later, you know, as I said last night, be careful what you wish for. I got a letter out of the blue from a woman named Jane Root, an English producer, had her own production company. And she had seen me on a book talk show, a late night show in London. She's in bed, she said, she was watching it, and she said, I'm gonna make him a presenter, as they say in England. And she wrote to me, I thought it was a joke. And then she kept writing, then she kept calling, and then she flew all the way from London. I was presenting the Anisfield Book Awards in Cleveland. And she flew just to have breakfast with me, and she said, I could put you in front of a camera. You just have to trust me. And so we did this series. It was a series on BBC called The Great Rail Journeys. And they get a celebrity to ride 3,000 miles on trains with a film crew. And they said, they wanted me to go to South America or Japan. Now, I like South America, I love Japan. But I said, I would only do it under 2 conditions. If you let me go to Africa, and I want to end my journey in the village where I lived when I was 19 years old, and if you let me take my 2 little girls, who were 12 and 14. And they said, yes to A, no to B. They say, adolescent girls, you know, children, they're going to act out, it's going to be a nightmare. You could get all kinds of diseases. I mean, this is Africa, you know, it's not Cella's first class, you know, transportation. And so they even sent a producer to our house and had dinner with us to see what our interaction was. And I told my kids, if you act out, you're dead, you know, like this is my big opportunity. And they were cool. And the result was...
See, you're lucky you have 2 girls, no offense.
Yeah.
Because that's why he'd be like, really?
Yeah, they go, yes, Daddy, no, Dad. I'm like, who are these kids, you know? And so we did it. We started at Great Zimbabwe, and we ended up at Dar es Salaam. It took 3 weeks. Maggie twisted her ankle. Maggie got malaria. There was a big train wreck. Then we took the domestic trains from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma, then a 4-hour Land Cruiser. You know, people have Toyota Land Cruisers? They're not meant for yuppies or in the streets in Chelsea. They're meant for the third world, the desert, man, in the bush, and with real GPSs, right? And we went back to that village, and I had left there 25 years before, and the whole village welcomed me back. But the conceit of the film, which he couldn't script, was me, the professor of African American Studies, trying to introduce his mixed children, because their mother is white.
Did your wife go on this trip?
Yes, she went,
She
but
did?
she wasn't one of the three characters in the thing. And for me, trying to introduce them to their African heritage, and for them looking at me and listening to my little lectures and saying, my heritage is in Lexington, Massachusetts, thank you very much. And the Guardian of London reviewed it, and the headline was, National Lampoon Goes to Africa. And it was honest. And the reception was so good that the BBC asked me if I could do a multi-part series, what would I do? And I wanted to do The Wonders of the African World. So I did a 6-part series, and then that was 14 documentaries ago.
You know, there's so many questions that occur to me, but because I think a lot of our folks here are journalism students, what occurs to me is, what is the message of this trajectory here? Because on the one hand, what I'm hearing is that the key to your success in journalism has been success in another field, similar to our previous guest this morning. And I wonder how that feels to the folks here who have dedicated themselves to training in journalism first, thing one. Thing two, a lot of the trajectory seems to depend on, what is it that Ashta, what was that wonderful phrase she introduced me to? What is it? Joyful entitlement. Joyful entitlement, thank you. A joyful entitlement, like you had a sense of where you wanted to go, but you needed the tap on the shoulder to get there.
Yeah.
So, and I have one other, and the third point is, you are right, that it seems to me that a lot of our institutions are very interested in diversity only to the degree to which white people control it.
Yes.
And you are one of the few who gets to tell your own story in your own way. So what is the message of your career, do you think, for these folks here?
Three fabulous questions. And if I forget, I don't want to not answer any of those.
All right.
The first point is the laying on of hands. That's joyful entitlement. That's what I call it. Everyone needs, well, I can't speak for you all, I can't speak for you, but for me, my father used to tell a story about Willie Mays, the great baseball player, center fielder for the Giants. He used to be the New York Giants. And my father worshiped Willie Mays. And his manager was Leo DeRocher. And if they were down, it's the bottom of the ninth, Leo DeRocher would say, Willie, I need you to hit a home run, and you can do it. Willie, go up and hit a home run. My father used to tell us that story all the time. And having, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, right? All three of the characters just get the right word spoken by the wizard in the end. So you get a brain, you get a heart, you get courage. But it's all a fiction, it's all here. And I have been very lucky to have, at crucial points in my life, John Morton Blum, the great American historian. I started writing these guest columns for the Yale Daily News when I came back from Africa, because my friends were now seniors, remember, 5-year BA, and I'm a junior. And we're sitting around just talking trash, and they go, why don't you write about it? You're always talking about your experience of mission, right? And I go, I could write for the Daily News? They go, yeah, you could do a guest column. So I go to his class, which is called Politics and Culture in 20th Century America, 202 kids, my junior year. And I worshiped this guy. I was a history major. And at the beginning, he said, is Mr. Gates in the room? And I thought, oh my God, what did I do? And I stood up, like that young man is, and he said, excellent editorial, op-ed, excellent essay in today's Yale Daily News. I got tears in my eyes, man. You know what? And I went home, I wrote another one, because I wanted, it's like Pavlovian. I always got positive reinforcement. Now, it's very curious your observation about the lateral move that I made. It was much easier for me to become a documentary filmmaker from my perch at Harvard than if I'd gone to the NYU film school. If I'd gone to the film school, I would have made films like Henry Hampton or Spike or Stanley Nelson, when they're the invisible presence behind the camera. The kind of documentaries I make are celebrity-driven, autobiographical. So I had to establish myself as a quote-unquote presence in order to make that lateral move. The third thing that's important, have you read Outliers? You all know Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. And he talks about the fact that for hockey players, the founders of Silicon Valley, all these people are born at a certain time. I was born at the perfect time for a black person with my set of skills, 1950. Why? My brother goes to West Virginia University in 1962. That was a big deal. The class of 66 at Yale had 6 black men to graduate. The class that entered with me 3 years later had 96. I would have gone to West Virginia University if I'd been 2 years younger. Or, like my family, to Howard or Morehouse or my female cousins at Spelman. But because of my age, the historically white schools like Columbia and Harvard and Yale were integrating in a serious way. So who else is in my class? Kurt Schmoke, the first black mayor of Baltimore. Sheila Jackson Lee, congressperson from Houston, as Barbara Jordan's seat. Ben Carson, the first pediatric neurosurgeon successfully to separate Siamese twins and joined at the brain. And now, as far as I'm concerned, he's gone off the range with his politics, but he's still a very good friend of mine. And a zillion—
Maybe you can help him.
Yeah, and a zillion lawyers and doctors. You see what I'm saying? It was like I hit it at the right time. So that by the time this woman called me from England, and I was able to make a good documentary and then another one, then I had to go out and raise money. Well, who am I pitching at these corporations? You know, when you see a PBS documentary, if you see Masterpiece Theaters brought to you by Exxon or one of these corporations, well, guess what? I looked at the board of directors at all these companies. My friends are on the board of directors. My black friends, with whom I studied at Yale, or by this time I had met through Martha's Vineyard or through friends. You know, it was like a perfect storm, to use a metaphor that's not quite right. I just hit it. I hit the wave. And then I've always had a fantasy of being a Renaissance man. And I work hard. I love to work. I probably was a terrible father, and I feel very guilty about that. You know, whenever you have family meetings or it's Christmas and I miss my mother and I start to cry, and I say, I was a terrible father. My girl said, Daddy, you were fine. But believe me, I was not there a lot. I didn't go to every school play. You know, I was on the road. You know, I was lecturing, I was doing research, I was very, very ambitious. And all I'm saying is that it was a curious confluence of forces, a certain timing, and a certain set of interests and maybe skills that I'm an entrepreneur, and I can't help it. I have a gene for that. You know, I just think of things. I mean, it's a gift. I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I think of that. I keep a Post-it pad in the bathroom, and I think of things. I thought of the whole of the Finding Your Roots series in the middle of the night. Just in 2 seconds, it just like came from nowhere. That I could trace people's family trees and do their DNA, and now it's become a franchise. You know, go figure, but that's it.
I think I wanted you to, we're at the halfway mark, so I think it's important to open it up to the questions, but I do want to ask just one more thing about that, and then we'll give you 5 minutes to kind of sum up your thoughts.
I'm sorry, but I didn't answer your question about the journalist.
Well, the question, though, becomes, I'll just say it, because in the interest of time, there are a lot of people who think that we're actually going backwards. The trajectory that, sure, you are a very hard worker, you're entrepreneurial, you have a clear vision of what you want to accomplish, and you also have connections from having been in the right place at the right time, which you then maximize. But there are many people who think that we are going backwards. You look at the Oscar nominations in this round, and many people find it scandalous. I will confess that I looked at the reception last night at which you were presented your award, and I was, I spent a lot of time in my own studio, and so I'm not looking around at rooms full of people, but I was quite taken aback by the lack of diversity in the room last night. And even at the awards presentation, just from the gender standpoint, how few women actually spoke. Yep. I mean, Cynthia and I were hosting, but even among the awardees, how few women actually spoke. And I just have to ask you, so it seems to me, I'm just offering data points here, the circumstances that allowed Henry Louis Gates to emerge, those are unique. But what message are we to draw from that? Are you the one and only?
The first thing I did last night when I walked in, I'm 64 years old, and I do this, I can't help it. I counted the black people when I walked into the reception, into the room. The first thing I did when I came in this door, these two doors, I looked around, how many black people are here? I can't help it. This is how I'm conditioned. And you're absolutely right. The terrible dilemma of the primary success of the civil rights movement, other than the dismantling of de jure segregation, which was enormously important in the Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court is trying to deconstruct, of course, was the creation of a new black middle and upper middle class. The black upper middle class has quadrupled, according to William Julius Wilson, since that terrible day in 1968 when Dr. King was killed. But the percentage of black children living at or beneath the poverty line is almost exactly the same as it was the day Dr. King was killed. And no model predicted this class divide within the African American community. So that affirmative action for my generation was a class escalator, as Lonnie Guinier puts it.
But, well, can I add a third data point, which is the degree to which people in the middle class are unable to, their children are unable to even maintain the status that they had in the middle class.
Absolutely.
Their children, they may be homeowners, the children of the police officers and firefighters and sanitation workers are unable to even to attain the level of stability that they had. That's the...
Absolutely. And the affirmative action at places like Harvard have become ways for the black upper middle class to perpetuate its upper middle class status. So that my class at Yale was full of first generation college kids, first generation Ivy kids, and working class kids. Now, most of my students are the children of black professionals. And over 50%, maybe over 60%, are actually the children of recent African immigrants, particularly Nigerians, because they there are more Nigerians than African than anybody else. So, and that's not a complaint, those are just facts. So one of the things I write about over and over is the class divide within the African American community. So, on the one hand, we could have Ken Chenault, who's a good friend of mine, running American Express, and a few years ago we had 5 black CEOs like Dick Parsons and other people that you know. But on the other hand, we have so much less mobility within the race, and the middle class, as you said, the traditional middle class, can no longer guarantee that their children will have a better life than they. But the part that I wanted to reflect on too before we went on was, you have to get a PhD in English in order to then go over and be a documentary filmmaker? And the answer is absolutely no. There are no other presenters like me. They let one in, and it was me. There's no one else making documentaries in the black space when they're autobiographical or an essay-like when the person looks at the camera. Everyone else is making a traditional kind of documentary, and we've never had more black documentarians than we do today. And we've never had more black journalists than we do today. But we have to reinvent the space. That's why I started The Root with Donald Graham. It was his idea. But TheRoot.com, which is celebrating its 7th anniversary next week, because we were trying to invent, trying to meet respond to this new shifting world, not bemoan it, but to try to reinvent our presence. I wanted to do what John Johnson did, but in the internet space. And Donald Graham and I were on, where are we? We're in the Pulitzer Building. I sat upstairs in the World Room for 9 years. And he's his family owned the Washington Post, as you know. And he and I used to do battle. We went at each other's throats. And one night, we came out of here, and he said he wanted to have a drink with me across the street. And I thought, oh my God, what's he going to get on me about? We used to fight all the time, And I was butterflies in my stomach, and he goes, I'd like to found a black Huffington Post, and I'd like to do it with you. And he could have knocked me over with a feather. I think that black people, if I had gone to a black person, even Oprah, is a friend of mine, and said, why don't we do this? The answer would have been no, I'm sure. It took a white guy who was rich to think of this idea and pony up the money to do it. I would like to think now, 7 years later, we have more black people willing to take that risk and put up their money or put together sort of venture models. But I've often found that it was easier for me to get sponsorship from white people or major corporations with black people on them, but basically white corporate, than from within the black community.
Why is that? And I swear I will come to you and others who have questions.
I would
Why?
really like.
Why is that?
I have a friend, I can't say, very wealthy black guy. He's very liberal, and if you knew his name, he'd fall over. But he'd say, "Let them get their own, man." He gets hit by all these black people for money. He goes, I used to eat rats, blah 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 blah. I'd rather pay taxes than give the money away. And I think that I think that we're only just learning about philanthropy. within the black community. I mean, in a way,
Philanthropy that isn't personal, like
Yeah,
getting
like
Peaches,
church.
like getting Peach's car out of the Hawk and stuff like that.
Or giving money to the missionary society in church. You know, we're great philanthropists for church. But in terms of you coming to me and saying you want to start your own program about the black experience on NPR, and can I help you raise the $1 million a year? That's very rare to be able to do that. And I've found that the black people who have helped me have been the ones, they're not spending their own money, they're on these boards and they get the company to do it, which I'll take, believe me. But in terms of dipping it into their own pocket, I don't think they feel secure enough yet. I think they, even if they're multimillionaires, they feel they're one paycheck from being thrown in the trash.
Let's hear from you. Let's hear from all of you.
You kind of touched on this earlier when you were talking about expanding your brand, but as black journalists, I feel like sometimes we get stigmatized if we cover black issues as either doing advocacy journalism or that's all we can do, and editors kind of try to pigeonhole us into that space. So how do we move past that?
You know, it's a good question. Michelle knows. When, you know, we've had, I don't know, 3 or 4 managing editors of The Root, right? So I'm the co-founder, and then we have a publisher, Donna Bird. So she and I would sit, and we'd figure out who are the best journalists in the field that we want to, whom we might want to run The Root. So I can't say any names, but we would go to people, and they would say, I'm not going to work in that space. It's too delimiting. It's like a ghetto for them. You know, the same thing for my generation. Many of the really interesting black scholars, like John Hope Franklin. John Hope Franklin refused to accept a position as the first chair of black studies at Harvard. He said it was a ghetto. He wasn't going to do it. He won an appointment in the history department. And he, to his dying day, he lived to be 94, I think, always made people call him a historian of Southern American history, not black history. For me, I saw opportunity and a space to grow by entering a field that people thought, and you remember this, people thought was bogus or had been set up by students, which it had. There were a lot of essentialists, you know, a lot of Afrocentrists, people making all kind of crazy demands. Not all, I mean, there were a lot of many great scholars, but the field as a whole didn't have universal respect. And I went to Harvard in 1991 to change that and build it, and I think that we've Anthony Appia and I now, we have 37 colleagues. The day we have 1, right? And I think we have done that. But it's how is the glass? I don't know what the best metaphor is. The bottle half empty is the bottle half full. Where can you make a thing? Where can you make a difference? I would sit down with these people, these prominent black journalists who are writing in a crossover space, and I would say, you can become as famous as John Johnson. You could take this thing. I was watching last night of the finalists. I mean the award winners, and I was thinking, we haven't even begun to use video on The Root. You know, basically we would report this dialogue. It would be taped and we would run it. But in terms of commissioning our own investigative thing, we haven't ever done that. But we can do that. It's the next iteration, right? And so it's a matter of your own headset about what you want to write about, but it's also, to answer your question more directly, a matter of you insisting on the right to write about whatever you want and not allowing yourself to be pigeonholed. But I think it would be a tragedy if you felt that if you did write about black issues, that would limit your career. And I think that we will have lost what the civil rights movement was all about. We will have lost what affirmative action was all about. We would have lost all the sacrifices black people and white people made to get you in this room in the first place if a black person is not free to write about black issues, if a woman is not free to write about women's issues, if a Muslim is not free to write about Islam. I think that you have to insist on the right to be multilingual, as it were, multicultural, and multivarious. And I think that's the most important thing.
Well, you've been dropping some knowledge all along. We're just going to ask you to take 3 minutes and send us off with a charge. Send us off with a final thought.
Well, I don't know if I can do that, but the reason that...
You can't do the 3 minutes, or you can't do the charge?
No, I'll do it. It's hard for me to do 3. You know, professors speak in 55-minute blocks, you know. But I'm a dreamer, man, and I think one of the cruelest things is to have your dreams stomped on, and then to let someone keep you from dreaming. So my advice is just keep dreaming. And, you know, life is going to be hard. You're going to be knocked down. People are going to try to undermine you. People will criticize you. You will doubt yourself. My favorite commercial ever made is a Michael Jordan commercial, and it's all about the games he lost. It's a beautiful commercial. And I did a profile of him for the New Yorker. And I said, who thought of that commercial? He said, I did. He said, it's the only commercial he ever thought of. And it's the games when he missed the last shot, and he still became Michael Jordan. And so you need a support network. And so my most important advice, other than to nurture your dreams, is to find that support network. It's going to be either in your family or a few friends, which is a new kind of family, and you keep it no matter what. There have to be people that you could be totally honest with, totally truthful. When you're scared, you have to be able to say it to yourself and say it to somebody who loves you, because they could brush you off, you know, when you stumble, and they could go, you can do it. And having somebody say you can do it, for me, it's Leo DeRocher and Willie Mays.
Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr., thank you so much.